You've seen them online, right? Debates about Israel and Palestine. They can generate so much more heat than light, becoming these tangled webs of emotion, history, and accusation. Well, we're going to dive into one of those exchanges. Our goal here isn't to solve the conflict, but to really deconstruct the arguments, to understand what each side is actually fighting for. The debate we're looking at was just filled with these raw, personal, and deeply charged moments. And this quote, it cuts right to the heart of the tension. It brings up questions about identity, authority, and who even has the right to speak on this issue. Honestly, it's the perfect entry point for understanding the fire behind all the words. And that's exactly what we're here to do. We're going to step back from the confrontation and try to bring some clarity. We're going to map out the key points of disagreement, not to declare a winner or anything like that, but just to understand the core of each argument. So you might think a debate like this would start with policy or history, but nope. The confrontation kicked off with a challenge to credentials. Before they could even get to the substance, the first battle was over who was even qualified to speak. And right away, you see these two competing ideas of what makes someone an expert. On one side, you have students who are leaning on their formal education and their personal backgrounds. But countering that, you have Charlie Kirk arguing that, real-world experience, traveling, meeting leaders, self-education, that actually holds more weight than a college degree. This fundamental disagreement over who has authority really set the stage for every clash that came after. So this clash over who gets to speak quickly escalated into the first major point of contention, the history of Gaza. And listen, this isn't just a disagreement over some facts. It's a battle over two fundamentally different stories about the exact same piece of land. Okay, so both sides in this debate are actually referring to the same key moments. 1967, Israel takes control of Gaza. 2005, which is a huge one, when Israel pulls all its settlers and military forces out. And then, in the years after that, Hamas seizes power. The dates themselves, everybody agrees on them. It's the interpretation of why they happened. That's where everything just falls apart. And here you see that divide so clearly. In Kirk's story, the 2005 withdrawal was this painful sacrifice for peace, a huge concession that was met with terror from Hamas instead of peace. But for the students, it wasn't a gesture at all. It was Israel finally admitting it was an illegal occupier. See? The exact same event, but two completely irreconcilable motives. From these arguments about the past, the conversation just skyrockets into the politics of the present. The arguments shifted to who's in charge in the Palestinian territories, the question of democracy, and, of course, the devastating human toll of the conflict. So, Kirk tries to reframe the whole debate with just one number. He points to the Palestinian Authority and claims its president hasn't held an election in over a decade. He's basically asking, why isn't the focus on what he calls a dictatorship instead of on Israel? The students' response is just swift and emotional. They dismiss the whole point about elections as a distraction from the violence happening right now. The argument is that, hey, regardless of the Palestinian Authority's democratic status, they're not the ones the students see as the primary source of harm to kids. Then, in the heat of this argument over the human cost, one of the most shocking claims of the entire exchange is made. A student implies this staggering death toll, as many as 3 million Palestinians, which they derived from a larger population figure. Now, it is crucial to understand that this number was not presented as some settled fact. It was an explosive claim, and Kirk immediately pushed back hard, calling the figure wildly inaccurate. This moment is a perfect example of how even the most basic data points, like casualty counts, are just fiercely disputed in this conflict. All right, so the argument then pivots from the political to something profoundly personal. It focuses on religion and the freedom to worship at some of the world's most sacred and, contested holy sites. A student shares her personal experience at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. She describes her prayer being disrupted by the presence of Israeli soldiers. She frames it as an act of intimidation that made her feel unsafe in a place of worship, even if she wasn't, physically stopped. Charlie Kirk then counters with a completely different and violent scenario. He portrays Jewish access to holy sites in the West Bank, like Hebron, as basically impossible and lethally dangerous. It creates this direct contrast between an experience of intimidation and one of mortal peril. So the disagreement really boils down to this. The student's perspective is Muslims can go, but it's conditional and it's fraught with fear. Kirk's perspective is Muslims have full access, while Jews are almost completely barred from the Temple Mount, their holiest site. They are describing two totally different realities at the exact same location. Ultimately, all these arguments over land, politics, prayer, they all funnel down to one core ideological conflict. This is the bedrock of the entire debate: the meaning of Zionism, how it relates to anti-Semitism, and the very right of the State of Israel to exist. A student tries to draw a very clear line in the sand here. They argue that you can be an anti-Zionist, meaning you oppose the political project of the modern State of Israel, without being an anti-Semite, meaning someone who hates Jewish people. For them, this is an absolutely critical distinction. Kirk, however, completely rejects that distinction. He reframes the argument immediately, basically equating anti-Zionism directly with a desire to deny Jewish people a right to self-determination in their ancestral land. In his view, the two concepts are inseparable. That distinction is just a meaningless and deceptive word game. So after deconstructing all these opposing arguments, we're left with this question, right? When two sides are operating from completely different historical narratives, when they see opposite political realities and have mutually exclusive experiences of faith and freedom, how is common ground even found? It forces us to ask, in a debate that started with a challenge over who is even allowed to speak, where does a real conversation even begin?